Mr. Cooper for Ms. Landsman, Dr. Ellis for MP Seaback, Mr. Iacono for Member of Parliament Oliphant, and MP Villemure for MP Bergeron. So welcome to all of you. So from the Department of Health, we have Dr. Stephen Lucas, Deputy Minister by video conference, Nadine Huggins, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Security Officer, Corporate Services Branch. From the Public Health Agency of Canada, Heather Jaffrey, President, Dr. Guillaume Poliquin, Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory by video conference, Donald Shepard, Vice President, Infectious Diseases and Vaccination Programs Branch, again by video conference. I understand that Ms. Jeffrey is the one with an opening statement for up to 5 minutes, so Ms. Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee today to discuss the documents tabled in Parliament on February 28th related to the termination of 2 scientists at the National Microbiology Laboratory in 2021. This is a very important discussion. The mandate of the Public Health Agency is to protect and promote the health of Canadians, and the National Microbiology Lab is an essential tool in that work. During the COVID pandemic, the work of the lab in rapidly developing diagnostic tests, genomic sequencing, wastewater surveillance, modeling, and research into medical countermeasures were critical to Canada's response then, and also to our ability to face future health threats. The Public Health Agency of Canada takes its accountability to Parliament and to Canadians very seriously. The agency has fully supported the work of the panel of arbiters and their deliberations to review the redactions in the package of documents that were tabled by the Minister of Health. Every day, our employees work with integrity to protect and promote the health of Canadians. We not only expect, but require our employees to abide by the Code of Conduct and the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector. As
the committee has heard from previous witnesses, the global threat environment is constantly evolving. Canada's excellence in research science is underpinned by collaboration. However, we know that science is also of interest to actors seeking economic and technological advantage.
Since these events took place, our security posture and policies have been strengthened and adapted. This cannot be a static effort. Processes have been put in place to ensure that our posture is continually reassessed in line with the evolving risks in order to ensure that we remain fully prepared to address them, not only now, but in future.
The package of documents tabled in Parliament reflect the results of an administrative investigation initiated in 2019 into the activities and subsequent termination of employment of 2 scientists at PHAC's National Microbiology Lab. At that time, research security concerns were also referred to the appropriate law enforcement authorities for investigation.
The investigation showed that the 2 individuals clearly failed to disclose and, in fact, took steps to conceal important information about their activities and affiliations from their employer, including their work with China. Their failure to follow security protocols and their failure to disclose their collaborations led to their suspension, the revocation of their security clearances, and ultimately their dismissal. As of January 20th, 2021, the 2 scientists were no longer employed by the Public Health Agency. The NML has always operated as a secured facility. However, the administrative investigation initiated in 2019 highlighted that the policies and procedures in place at the time needed to be further strengthened, along with measures to ensure compliance and to mitigate the risks posed by the current threat environment. In
response, the agency has invested significant time and attention to ensure research and science policies have a renewed focus on security.
Specific physical, personnel, cyber, and operational security measures have been updated, while also galvanizing an institutional culture that recognizes the responsibility to ensure full awareness and implementation of these measures in light of the important work of the NML and the ever-shifting threat landscape. This is consistent with efforts across the Government of Canada to support innovation and research, while also protecting national security. The development by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada of national security guidelines for research partnerships and identification of sensitive research areas are recent examples of this work. FAT complies fully with biosecurity regulations, the Human Pathogens and Toxins Act, and the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Program, and works closely with regulatory bodies to ensure ongoing compliance. All international collaborations require review from a security perspective, and governance is in place to vet and approve new collaborations. This includes the mandatory use of material transfer agreements, as well as formal agreements to structure collaborations such as collaborative research agreements, and a strengthened policy on affiliations with academic, research, and healthcare organizations as part of a suite of additional scientific integrity policies.
PHAC has
Communication.
PHAC has established clear and regular training and communication on security and employee accountabilities. The NML has a renewed proactive security posture that has reinforced the physical security of the building. Screening measures are strictly enforced for all staff and external visitors, including the requirement for visitors to be accompanied at all times and without exception.
The processes and policies that are in place will continue to be evaluated and enhanced with the view to continuously protecting the confidence and trust of Canadians in our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jeffrey. Now, I understand that we have an issue, a technical issue with one of the monitors in the room, so we're going to suspend for a moment. It has to be unplugged and plugged back in again. It works on a lot of things, and hopefully it will work this time, so we'll suspend for a minute. And we will begin with our first round of questions. MP Chong, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for appearing again in front of our committee. Reports some time ago suggested that Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng could sue the Government of Canada. So my first question is, can you confirm that there are no legal proceedings that have been initiated by either Drs. Chu or Cheng against the Government of Canada?
I'm in a position to confirm that they had filed a complaint with the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency with regard to the suspension of their clearances.
Okay, and that's the extent of any proceedings that they have initiated to your knowledge?
As far as I'm
Okay,
aware.
thank you. One of the things we're trying to understand at the committee is why it took 10 months for the lab to be secured, 10 months between the discovery of a patent improperly registered in the People's Republic of China and July 5th of 2019 when the two scientists were escorted out of the lab. And so my questions are framed in that light to try to understand why it took 10 months. So my first question is, when did the Minister of Health and her office first become aware of the national security breaches at the lab?
My understanding is that the Minister of Health was briefed at different junctures in the investigation to be informed of decisions that were being taken by the deputy head of the agency in line with the administrative investigations. For example, in June 2019 on the results of the fact-finding investigation, in August 2020 on the suspension of the employees, and in January 2021 on their firing.
The minister's office or the minister made aware before June of 2019?
My understanding is that they were briefed periodically. I don't have specific dates.
Okay. Could you get back to the committee and let us know when the minister and her office were first made aware of this this issue at the lab?
Yes, we will look back at the records.
Thank you.
And,
when did the president of the agency, your predecessor, first become aware of these national security breaches at the lab?
my understanding is that the initial briefings led to some identification by the security branch of the health portfolio, and that the opening of the fact-finding investigation was subsequently authorized. I don't have the specific date that the president would have been briefed on this, but the security branch did launch with the president of the agency that fact-finding investigation in December 2018.
Okay. I mean, the reason I asked this, Madam Jeffrey, is that the role of the president, the responsibilities of the president, the authorities of the president are to grant security clearances and to oversee the classification of employees and the access of those employees to the lab. So I think if you could let us know at some, after, if you could let us know, let the clerk of the committee know when the president first became aware of these breaches, because it's material to that that person's responsibility to ensure that security clearances are appropriate at the lab. The president of PIAC exited her role as president of PIAC on February 27th, 2019. A new deputy head was not appointed until May 6th of that year. So there was a period of about 10 weeks in which there was no president of PIAC. So my first question is, was there an interim or acting president of PIAC during that period from the end of February to the beginning of May of 2019?
Yes, as is normal, an interim president would be appointed with delegation during that period.
And who was that? What was that role? Was it an ADM or was it a director general? Like what? Who was the acting president during that period?
The acting president during that period was the chief public health officer.
Chief public health officer. And did that person, the chief public health officer, did she have the delegated authority over security clearances for the lab?
The policy on delegation resides with the deputy head. However, the approval of individual clearances is delegated to the chief security officer of the agency.
Okay, and so that wasn't, the delegation to the chief security officer wasn't just for that interregnum period. It's generally delegated at all times.
Yes, given the volume and size of the agency, the sort of day-to-day decision-making on security clearances resides with the chief security officer.
Okay. And when did the chief security officer first become aware of the national security issues at the lab?
So my understanding is that in August of 2018, subsequent to a briefing that was given for general awareness by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, that the potential concerns regarding the vulnerability of lab employees to potential influence were flagged to the service, and fact-finding began, and that in September, potential issues began to be identified, and the chief security officer was involved in those discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Francosatos for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Just to clear some things up from previous meetings to ensure the record is correct, the scientists in question, were they agents of the Chinese state or were they Canadian in fact?
Scientists in question were Canadian citizens, long-standing employees of the lab, and respected in their field of scientific effort.
Thank you very much. Was the shipment of live Ebola and Henipa virus to the Wuhan Institute authorized?
Yes, the shipment to the Wuhan Institute was authorized as per the standard procedures of the lab. The procedures around its transit were in full compliance with the relevant act and with biosafety regulations.
You've answered my next question, which was whether or not all of this went through the necessary checks, so thank you very much. Were there any unauthorized shipments of removal of pathogens from the lab?
Mr. Chair, we have a very rigorous procedure to audit and account for all of the pathogens and toxins at the lab, and we are 100% certain that there were no unauthorized removals of high-consequence pathogens or toxins from the lab environment at any time.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffrey. In your presentation, or your testimony rather, you went over steps that have been taken to ensure best practices going forward. Could you just reiterate the keys there, that what you would say would be the kind of key or signature advances that have been made to ensure, as I say, best practices now and in the future?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are sort of 5 main areas of program improvements to security that we made at the lab. First, around physical security, we have tightened physical security screening measures. We've installed a modernized access control system, enhanced video surveillance and monitoring, strict protocols for delivery and shipping. We have improved our IMIT information technology to guard against cyber risk, comprehensive threat risk assessments, new procedures for information and travel, completed updates to key functions. We have a new policy on affiliations, a new updated approach to student hiring and strict requirements, and new structures for governance and approval, including a science security committee, enhanced incident response and monitoring protocols, compliance monitoring, and requirements for declarations of conflict of interest and affiliations.
Thank you very much. That's quite thorough. How are these introduced? In consultation with whom? And I'm just trying to understand how exactly decisions were arrived at. How did you make the decisions to go in this particular direction? Who advised? These kinds of things.
So in response to any incidents, including the ones identified in this case, we work with national security and law enforcement, public safety personnel, as well as with our chief security officer in the branch to identify improvements to protocols and procedures that would help to prevent or to provide early warning to any such incidents in the future. It's really important to review these constantly given the evolving nature of security threats and to maintain our investments and not just physical updates, but also extensive programs of training and employee awareness because these measures are strengthened by a culture where everyone is not only aware but fully compliant with the measures that are in place. So we have expended energy on both these fronts.
Understood. You just mentioned employee awareness. Can you go into, Ms. Jeffries, what is done to ensure as much employee awareness in the context, as you say, of evolving threats, ever-evolving threats?
We've implemented mandatory training to raise awareness and provide guidance on the security responsibilities and accountabilities of all staff and security personnel at all levels. We've enhanced our onboarding and departure procedures. We have clear and regular communication in writing and through town halls and other measures in terms of security and conflict of interest, and regular updates to those processes.
And to what extent are you engaged, or is the organization engaged, rather, with international contacts, counterpart organizations, either in the Five Eyes or G7 contexts?
International collaboration in this field is key to success. There is a limited set of international counterparts that work in this field and that have labs at the level of that Canada does. So we are in constant contact with them, as are our national security and law enforcement personnel, to compare our security posture, to share enhancements, and to ensure that we are keeping pace with the evolving nature of the global situation.
Monsieur le Président, je m'excuse. Appel au règlement.
Oh, yes.
Point of order.
Je m'excuse, je n'entends pas les réponses.
I'm not hearing the answers from Ms. Jeffrey as her voice trails off and her volume goes much lower at the end of her sentences. So perhaps speak more clearly and louder, please.
Yes, if I was back in my old drill as radio program director, I'd be talking to you about mic technique. So make sure you speak up consistently. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move it closer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of times.
All right, so you get to try again now. Mr. Villamore, the next 6 minutes are yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being here with us to our witnesses. I'll say this a bit briefly. How come this series of events was even possible?
I would say that we have quite strict security procedures and processes in place. In this particular situation, we were dealing with two employees, Canadian scientists eminent in their field, who took measures to hide their affiliations and aspects of their work. It was through awareness and training that the public health agency and the lab personnel at the time identified a potential source of concern and then launched a series of investigations. Those successive investigations uncovered different layers of incidents, first allegations, and then sought evidence and enlisted.
Merci. Je m'excuse.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but I just want to get right to the point. Since then, you have implemented certain policies. If I understand correctly, however, they were already in place and they were not followed. Is that because of a lack of supervision, of responsibility? What happened?
I would say we've significantly enhanced our policies because we are always looking for ways to detect and respond to such cases as early as possible, as well as to keep pace with evolving threats. In this case, employees were taking active steps to hide their activities and indeed made false declarations to the officials throughout their investigation. And it was only through the tools available to our security, intelligence, and public safety institutions under their governance and acts that allowed us to uncover the evidence that allowed this to proceed.
Understood. My previous colleague asked a question, and I would like to follow up. Were the two scientists Canadian citizens, or were they agents of the People's Republic of China? Is it possible that they were both? That's my question.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In this case, these were indeed Canadian citizens and eminent scientists. However, the investigation shows, and through our Canadian Security Intelligence Service colleagues, brought forward evidence that they were working in undeclared collaborations with the Institute in China, and for this reason, they were terminated.
Est-ce que vous avez pu conclure que c'était des...
Were you able to conclude that they were actually agents or investigators from the People's Republic of China or from their army?
The investigations brought forward, including the reports that were tabled in Parliament from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, showed that they were engaged in discussions with the Thousand Talents program in China and other talent programs that were incompatible with their status at the lab, and that they lied to cover these activities.
Et si je coupe court aux métaphores?
If I get cut to the chase, the answer is yes. Is that correct?
I think the documents speak for themselves in terms of the activities that they outlined that the scientists engaged in that weren't declared.
Dites-moi, lorsque vous avez...
When you found out about this issue, you asked an external agency to do an investigation. Why did you go to the private sector? Why didn't you go in with another organization that was internal? Why did you not go towards our own intelligence services?
Mr. Chair, we pursued a number of different avenues in parallel. So initially, it was the security branch of the health portfolio that conducted some initial fact-finding, for example, uncovering the patent in September of 2018 that launched the subsequent investigations. there are areas of the investigation that are administrative in nature. At the same time, our national security counterparts were notified and began their own parallel investigations. However, it is standard practice to ensure the independence of the investigation and full dedicated focus on it to contract with external agencies that have the required expertise to do so, but I would underline that this was in parallel to national security and law enforcement
D'accord.
efforts.
Et comment Presidium Security Consulting
How did Presidium Security Consulting, how were they chosen? What were the criteria?
I'll maybe turn to our Chief Security Officer to respond to that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Normally, there is a standing offer that we rely on for these types of investigations of administrative nature. And I can certainly come back to the committee with the details around how that particular contract was awarded.
Thank you, Ms. Huggins. Thank you, Mr. Villamur. We'll now go to Ms. Idla for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. It's quite concerning as well to hear that this government did not enforce measures or protocols to keep Canadian research and intellectual property secure. So one of my immediate questions is, when these measures or protocols were not enforced by the government, who was it that was not enforcing these measures or protocols?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. In this case, there was intellectual property at play, and this was the patent that was initially identified at the time and is evidenced in the documents. There were different discussions about whether the intellectual property at question was indeed something that was proprietary or would have been more broadly available. The investigation, however, uncovered evidence of other collaborations that were underway that were undeclared. The protocols and procedures around the requirements for approving international collaboration agreements were subsequently reinforced, and the issues relating to the definition of what constitutes intellectual property have also been reinforced through awareness campaigns and underlined with the management of that office, which has been centralized and strengthened.
How often does the agency meet with CSIS or other relevant security agencies to improve operational security of Canada's research facilities?
At the time of these events, my understanding is that there were quarterly briefings taking place with different research institutions, of which the National Microbiology Lab was one. I would say that in intervening years, our relationship has become even closer. The expanded activities of the agency in response to the global pandemic, the importance of the intellectual property and the science related to our vaccines, but indeed many areas of health research require very close collaboration that has been reflected in the recently launched ISED research security partnership policy that indeed focuses on the kinds of scientific cooperation that occur throughout the Canadian research community, not only within the Government of Canada or the Public Health Agency, but across the country. And so these are risks and important scientific value that need to be protected across the country, not only within the labs of the Public Health Agency.
You mentioned in a previous response some of the policies that have changed. And I wonder if you could share with us over the last 5 years what has been done to improve the resilience of departmental activities from foreign interference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the most important activities that has taken place is awareness, employee communications, engagement, and indeed it was awareness briefing that raised the risk of these particular cases. The mandatory training, the emphasis on security responsibilities for all of our staff, no matter where they work and at what level, in addition to the physical and, of course, cybersecurity posture that has been enhanced. So if I can say both the hardware and the software of how we deal with security has been fundamentally strengthened and improved. The work of committees like this one is very important to continuing to raise that awareness, and we're continuing to adapt our procedures as threats evolve in line with their consultations with law enforcement and security counterparts.
What could agencies like yours do to do? What could you do better to report national security incidents to parliamentarians?
I think there have been a number of structures set up to look at national security issues, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, but also, for example, in this case, the ad hoc committee structure that was struck and the panel of arbiters used a number of different techniques to ensure that information that related to national security could be divulged to the maximum extent possible while still protecting what is highly sensitive information. For example, the technique of summarizing key national security information so as not to reveal sensitive information about sources and other issues has been effective in allowing the content to be released in some cases while protecting the methods and sources.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Idlot. We'll now go to Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jeffrey, who did the two scientists, Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng, report to?
I'm going to turn to my colleague, Dr. Polican, to confirm.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Chu reported to Dr. Gary Copinger within special pathogens. Dr. Cheng reported to Grant McClarty, though has different functions within the lab over his course of his employment.
Can you provide the titles of those two individuals?
Yes, Dr. Copinger was Chief of Special Pathogens, and Dr. McClarty was the Director of the Scientific Technologies Core.
And are they both employed at the lab with PHAC today?
Both individuals have taken up other opportunities over the course of the past several years.
Did the 10-week delay for the Prime Minister to appoint a new president of PHAC have an impact on securing the lab?
I can say that we move forward, Mr. Chair, as expediently as possible with the investigations. Initially, we had circumstances, then allegations, but given the severity and impact of them, it was very important to have evidence. And as soon as evidence was secured, we moved forward.
I asked you a specific question respectfully. Did the gap, the 10-week period in which there was no one at the top of PHAC, have an impact on the ability to secure the lab, yes or no?
No.
Okay, thank you for that. Between the time that red flags were first raised about Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng in the fall of 2018 through to the time that they were marched out of the lab on July 5th of 2019, were any restrictions during that nearly 11-month window placed upon them in terms of their access to the lab?
I'm going to turn to my colleague. At the time, the circumstances were still under investigation, and I would say that until the Canadian Security Intelligence Service was able to provide evidence that pointed to their willing collaboration that was undeclared, and that would have been in June of 2020, there was not evidence of their affiliations with external actors.
Ms. Jeffrey, I find that respectfully, and I know you weren't in charge at the time, but I find that astounding because in March of 2019, PHAC had a fact-finding report that indicated that there had been multiple breaches by Dr. Cheng and Dr. Chu with respect to security, with respect to intellectual property, and that indeed they had been on an unauthorized basis collaborating with the PRC, including the People's Liberation Army. So how at Canada's highest security lab, a level 4 lab, would they have continued to have unfettered access with PHAC having that information?
Mr. Chair, what I can say is that the evidence of their involvement in the talent programs and the foreign associations and some of their travel were not presented to the Public Health Agency until June 30th, 2020.
The fact-finding report was presented to PHAC on March 23rd, 2019, and that report contained all of the things that I just mentioned.
It's very important, given the seriousness of allegations, that we have evidence to back up the allegations.
Ms. Jeffrey, it was a fact-finding report. What evidence was needed to say that perhaps it's not a good idea to have two scientists who are working with Beijing on an unauthorized basis, including the PLA, to have access to a level 4 lab? I think common sense would indicate that they should not have been there after that time.
The administrative investigation that was concluded in the spring of 2019 specifically said that that administrative investigation needed to be launched in order to determine if the allegations that had been raised in the fact-finding were indeed founded. So they were still allegations at that point in time, and in July 2019, both employees, as a result of that, were placed on leave without pay.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. It's now Ms. Yip's turn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming on a Friday to speak with us. Ms. Jeffries, would there have been an instance where PHAC would table drop the documents without going through the appropriate vetting process?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The information in these administrative investigations is clearly information that is subject to the Privacy Act. It also includes highly sensitive national security information, including information provided by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The need to protect and ensure that these documents are disclosed in a protected setting underpinned the redactions that were initially made. So there is no circumstance that I'm aware of where these types of reports are released unredacted because of the acts that apply.
Ms. Jeffrey, in your opening statement, you spoke about a supportive culture. Could you elaborate on that?
Collaboration in research is at the heart of scientific advancement, public health research in particular, and in particular into the consequences of these pathogens, as we saw, for example, in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, in the SARS outbreak in Canada, and most recently with COVID-19, show that international collaboration is essential to advance quickly to keep pace with evolving and mutating viruses. It's important, while safeguarding the security of these pathogens and toxins, as well as of our science, to be able to collaborate in a secure environment. So it is very important that our personnel understand and work within policies that allow them to collaborate where necessarily, while respecting the need to protect their work from unauthorized use. And so it is, I think, in this type of context, and certainly as you've seen in the security awareness and in the recently launched research security policy writ large across the country, it's very, very important that our science personnel are able to collaborate, but at the same time are very aware of the need for review, approvals, permissions, and appropriate boundaries on that collaboration.
Does that supportive culture extend to Chinese Canadian scientists? Since the incident at Winnipeg Labs, the sensitive research guidelines, as you've mentioned, have been introduced, resulting in a list of research organizations that are believed to pose a high risk to national security. Most of the organizations named on the list are Chinese. This has hindered funding applications and career advancement for some Chinese Canadian scientists, based not necessarily on any association with organizations on the list, but based solely on their Chinese surnames. What assurances can you provide to these scientists?
It's for exactly this reason that the investigation processes that we conducted at the time were so thorough and relied on evidence rather than allegations. The processes that we have in place now to review research collaborations and affiliations are broad-based and not specific to particular individuals. All of our scientists must sign a code of conduct and are required to declare conflicts of interest and affiliations. In this case, we had scientists that sought to hide and had undeclared affiliations, and that was the reason why they were fired. Scientists who work in the full knowledge and with declared conflicts of interest and affiliations have nothing to fear from the processes that we have enhanced and put in place.
Mr. Lucas or Mr. Poliquin or Mr. Shepherd, do you have any further comments on this issue?
I would just note that the approach that Ms. Jeffrey articulated in terms of research security is of our labs is also undertaken at Health Canada in our labs, albeit at which have different function and different biosecurity levels, and indeed across the government, consistent with the policies that Minister Champagne and most recently Minister Holland have articulated in terms of research security.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Now it's Mr. Villemer's turn for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Jeffrey.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffrey. I only have 2.5 minutes, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. After finding out about the report, what we can what we're faced with is the naivety or the incompetence of this organization. During your last witness testimony, you said that the security control process starts with a reliability security clearance, and then the file is transmitted to the RCMP and CSIS to obtain a security clearance code. Then there is... was your reasoning based on the reasoning of CSIS, the RCMP, or other organizations? Please cut right to the chase.
Much, Mr. Chair. In the process that we undertake to provide security clearances, the Public Health Agency and the security branch of the health portfolio undertakes the initial reliability checks, etc. All security clearances go through a process of verification by the RCMP and then are referred for secret security clearances to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service that conducts the loyalty and reliability assessments. And they send their assessments back to FACT Security, and the final decisions are made in the case of these clearances. For example, when indices were raised by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the deputy head of the agency took the decision to revoke the clearance.
Vous avez quand même dit que ces gens-là avaient une undeclared affiliation.
You did say that these people had an undeclared affiliation. The Army, the Popular Liberation Army, is not small potatoes. A decision was made based on these investigations. Were they complete? Did you not have any idea? Because the Liberation Army is not some NGO.
Security clearances are periodically reviewed. At the time that the security clearances were granted, these were scientists of long standing working at the agency. None of the indices or events that subsequently emerged were evident, and indeed in these documents there is no evidence prior to this time of covert activities.
Je retiendrai que les politiques ne fonctionnent pas.
So the policies don't work, that's what I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Villemer. Ms. Idlout, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My next couple of questions are regarding Canada's or others' view of Canada and whether Canada's credibility has been impacted. So do you believe that the Winnipeg lab incident has impacted Canada's credibility with the research institutions of our NATO and Five Eyes partners?
The National Microbiology Lab is a world-renowned research institution of high reputation. Our partners internationally also face similar threats of foreign interference and are adopting many similar measures. The science of the lab remains well respected. The lab continues to be accredited, for example, by U.S. counterparts to the highest standards of biosafety and biosecurity. So no, I don't believe that the lab's reputation suffered, given the action that we took and given the strengthening of the security protocols since that time.
Could you elaborate more on what you mean by the policies or the strategies that may have changed to make sure that we have greater resilience in the scientific institutions?
The measures that we took were in several different domains. There have been physical security measures and enhancements related to our protocols around shipping, around physical security of the lab, access controls. We have more stringent policies in terms of the use of students at the lab. We have strengthened our intellectual property protocols. We have strengthened our cybersecurity measures. We have a detailed program of cooperation with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and public safety to ensure that we're abreast of any changes in the security landscape. And we have enhanced our training and protocols for our staff so that they're aware and are able to flag any incidents that might be of concern for further investigation.
You're just about out of time. Okay. All right. Thank you. Dr. Ellis, you have 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks everyone for being here. To you, Ms. Jeffrey, you talked about security clearances being reviewed on a regular basis. Can you talk about what the current policy is?
The current security screening process for security clearances at the secret level requires review every 10 years unless incidents arise that require a review for cause of that clearance, as was the case in this situation.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, can you tell us before this incident, when were these security clearances for, just for Dr. Chu, when was it last reviewed before this incident?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information at hand.
Could you please provide that to the committee, please?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Are there any health scientists of any nationality currently working for the Government of Canada who have participated in one of the over 200 PRC talent recruitment programs?
I'm not able to comment on that. I can comment about the processes at the Public Health Agency, where we require conflict of interest and affiliation declarations from all of our scientists, indeed from all of our personnel. And I can say that participation in talent programs of foreign countries, if declared, would be a significant conflict of interest and would not be accepted.
Thank you for that. And through you, Chair, can you tell the committee, to the best of your knowledge, are there any employees working at labs in Canada now who are members of talent programs?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm unable to comment on labs across the country. I can only comment on the declared affiliations and conflicts of interest of the staff at the Public Health Agency, as I previously mentioned.
Yes, so how many scientists would fall
Appel
into
au
that?
règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Villamore.
Comme indiqué plus
As previously said, as I mentioned earlier, Ms. Jeffrey is trailing off. Her voice is trailing off, and I can't hear the end of her answers, rather.
Okay, I'll give some floor cues. Okay, all right. Do you need the preceding answer to be repeated, Mr. Villamore?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, please.
Okay, I've stopped the clock, so if you can repeat that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I can say is, first of all, I'm the deputy head of the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm not in a position to comment on the participation of scientists across the country. I can comment on the work of the personnel that belong to the Public Health Agency. I can say that they're required to submit declarations of affiliations for research and also conflict of interest. If they were, those types of talent programs would be required to be declared. If they were declared, they would constitute a conflict of interest and would not be allowed, given the nature of their work. And in the case that's at issue today, scientists hid and, in fact, lied about those affiliations. And when they were discovered, those scientists were terminated because of that.
Thank you very much. Just to be
Doctor.
clear, Chair, I would suggest I have 3 minutes left. Am I clear with that?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lucas, what we heard from Ms. Jeffrey just now is that there be no scientists known to be participating in any talent programs that the Government of Canada would be aware of. Is that your indication as well, sir?
Mr. Chair, similar to the response of Madame Jeffrey, I can speak to Health Canada and the regulatory scientists in Health Canada who perform product reviews in context of the Food and Drug Act and other statutes are subject to the same requirements in terms of declarations of conflict of interest and affiliations. And on the basis of those, to our knowledge, there are no affiliations or conflicts of concern, including talent programs.
Thank you very much. No, thank you for that, Dr. Lucas. Through you, Chair, I'll ask the same question to Ms. Hudgens. Are you aware of any scientists with declared affiliations with talent programs who are currently working for the Government of Canada?
Thank you for the question. The answer to that question is similar to that of Ms. Jeffrey and Dr. Lucas. I have no knowledge of that and am unable to make that blanket assertion.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Ms. Jeffrey, we now know that the Dr. Chu's computer was mirrored in about February of 2019. Yet in spite of all that, shipments of Ebola and Henipavirus were allowed to continue on March 31st, 2019. Do you think that's appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, there was extensive international collaboration in responding to the Ebola outbreak that took place in West Africa from 2014 to 2016. The work that the National Microbiology Lab and indeed the life's work of Dr. Chu was in therapeutics to respond to Ebola. The collaboration that was taking place was authorized and was fully approved through the procedures that were in place.
Thanks, Ms. Jeffrey. Through you, Chair, if I might interrupt you, I apologize for that, but I didn't ask you if they were approved. I asked you, do you think it's appropriate given what you now know?
I think that international collaboration on therapeutics for pathogens and toxins continues to be very important to the development of the science. I would say that obviously in hindsight, given the activities of these scientists, which emerged much later in that timeline, and evidence of those activities, we would obviously look at decisions that were taken around their work sooner, but the work of collaboration on Ebola continued to be an international priority, and indeed many countries, Canada included, the United States, but also including China, were active in Western Africa, responding on the ground to the Ebola outbreak, and it was in that vein that the collaboration was approved and the work authorized.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. We'll now go to Mr. Erskine Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. On the one hand, we had the director of CSIS at this committee earlier, and he said, in his view, that PHAC acted expeditiously. That's a good thing. I do want to pick up, though, on my colleague's questioning just now. So I understand the rationale for the shipment of Ebola to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at the end of March in 2019. It's my understanding when I looked through the email chains, it was Dr. Chu that instigated that transfer, yes?
I will turn to my colleague, Dr. Pelican, to talk about the rationale for that transfer. It was related to Dr. Chu's work, but over to you, Dr. Pelican.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, Dr. Chu has been a longstanding, at that point, and internationally recognized scientist who had led the development of the Ebola monoclonal antibodies, which were trialed.
I understand it, but she was the instigator of the transfer. Yes or no?
Dr. Chu was the primary interlocutor with WIV.
Okay, and yet at the same time, I mean, a week earlier, and Presidia didn't get nearly the facts that CSIS was able to uncover. But, you know, they were contracted December 2018, and there's a preliminary report. They've got investigative findings. In their investigative findings, they say, and related to the patent, the undisclosed patent by Dr. Chu, they say it's highly improbable that she did not know. They go on to note there's a collaboration with a number of individuals, including at the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences, for which there may not be a letter of support and further investigations required. At that point, there's an investigation underway specifically related to Dr. Chu. How is it that PHAC officials, I've seen the email chains, there are other PHAC officials that are obviously doing the approvals here, no red flags? I'll stay with Mr. Poliquin. You seem to know more. Like, no red flags here? Why no red flags? How could there possibly not be red flags?
So as Ms. Jeffrey had highlighted, China had been very active in the 2014-2016 West Africa Ebola outbreak.
I don't mean about China. I mean about Dr. Chu. Dr. Chu's under investigation. There's a report related to Dr. Chu, March 23rd. She's the instigating force behind this transfer. How are there not red flags at that point?
So, Mr. Chair, the investigation was, as has been previously highlighted, these were allegations, and further investigation was ongoing.
Well, except that the report does say it's highly improbable that she did not know about the patent. So, further investigation is warranted, but they're already casting aspersions on the authenticity of her answers at that point. I don't know. Like, I'll be honest. Like, on the chain of events, a major overblown commentary from conservatives. We've got CSIS director coming here saying no expeditious action, but I do look at the email chains here on approvals, and look, PHAC was aware of this too. I see an email from Alan Lau on April 3rd saying we didn't do anything wrong. ... Just that because of the nature of the pathogens and where it was going, they, the higher ups in PHAC, wanted to know if we did our due diligence. But it strikes me if full due diligence had been done, specifically in relation to Dr. Chu, that transfer does not occur at the end of March. Is that fair to say?